The chest comes up from the hold, and every man on deck leans in. This is the moment the stories promise. Gold. Doubloons stacked to the lid, throwing back the lamplight. The quartermaster throws the latch, and the deck goes quiet, because it isn't gold. It's silver, gray and heavy, stamped by hand, and before a single man is allowed to touch it, the whole lot goes onto a scale. The most famous treasure in the history of piracy was almost never the gold you are picturing. It was one silver coin, and that coin was the most advanced machine of its age. You know it by its nickname, the Piece of Eight. It turns up in every pirate story ever told, cried out by parrots, buried under palm trees, spilling from split sacks onto a beach. Most people file it away as a prop, a shiny thing that just meant treasure. It was far more than that. This one coin was a piece of precision engineering, built to a single exact standard, and it did a job no money had ever done before. It became the currency of the whole planet. Spent in Madrid, spent in Boston, spent in the markets of China, all at the same time, all trusted the same way. This is the real story of that coin. Where the silver came from, how the coin was made, why people cut it into wedges to make change, and why the chest of gold you have been sold your whole life is mostly a lie. If you want history told straight, with the myths put on trial against the actual record, subscribe. That is the whole job of this channel. Now, back to the coin and to the mountain that bled to make it. Start with the silver, because none of the rest happens without it. Almost all of it came out of a single mountain in the high Andes, in what is now Bolivia and was then Spanish Peru. The Spanish called it Cerro Rico, the rich hill. It is a dull red cone that climbs to nearly 3 miles above the sea, standing over the city of Potosí, in air so thin a newcomer gets dizzy walking uphill. In 1545, a local miner named Diego Hualpa is said to have been caught out on the slope after dark. He built a fire to keep from freezing, and the story goes that the heat loosened the ground, and a vein of pure silver ran out of it like melted solder. Whether it happened exactly that way, nobody can prove, and the tale has the neat shape of a legend. What is certain is that within a few years, the Spanish had found the richest silver deposit any human being had ever laid eyes on. The scale of it is hard to hold in your head. Silver came off that mountain for 200 years, and some estimates put the total near 40,000 tons. So much wealth poured out of the rock that the city of Potosí swelled into one of the largest in the world, by some counts more than 100,000 people, at times pushing toward 160,000, rivaling London or Paris while sitting in a frozen desert where almost nothing grows. It filled with churches and gambling houses and imported luxury, an outrageous boomtown 2.5 miles up in the mountains. The Spanish had a phrase for anything of impossible worth. Vale un Potosí. It meant worth a Potosí, worth a fortune past counting. The mountain became a byword for money itself. Now the part the pirate stories always leave out. That silver did not lift itself out of the rock. It was carried out on the backs of men who were sent into the dark and were not expected to come home. The first rush, in the earliest years, worked the rich surface ores using native wind ovens, and it burned through the easy silver fast, within about 15 years. What came next is what turned Potosí into an engine, and that engine ran on people. To feed it, the Spanish revived an old Inca labor draft called the Mita. Under Viceroy Francisco de Toledo, in the early 1570s, indigenous villages across an enormous stretch of the Andes were ordered to send a share of their grown men to Potosí every year, roughly 1 man in 7, on a rotation that could drag a worker hundreds of miles from home for months at a stretch. Toledo built the system. The fuel was human beings, and the villages that fed it were hollowed out, and a whole economy grew up to keep that engine fed. Herds of mules hauled ore and supplies up the mountain roads. Ranches spread across the highlands to put meat in front of the workers, and so much grain got pulled toward Potosí that farming regions nearby went hungry to feed it. Above all, there was coca. Workers chewed coca leaf by the sackful to blunt the hunger, the cold, and the exhaustion of a shift underground, and a coca trade sprang up around the mines to supply it. The mountain did not just swallow men. It reordered a whole slice of a continent to keep swallowing them. Underground, the work was close to a death sentence. Men hauled sacks of ore up rickety ladders from shafts sunk deep into the mountain, in heat and foul air, choking on dust that scarred their lungs until they drowned in them. Cave-ins were routine, and on the surface it somehow got worse, because refining the silver meant mercury. The rich surface ore was gone, so to pull metal out of the crushed low-grade rock, Workers spread it across stone courtyards, mixed it with salt and copper sulfate, and then trod it together with liquid mercury, sometimes for weeks, barefoot, breathing the vapor. Then they heated the paste to boil the mercury off and leave the silver behind. The mercury itself came from another mine to the west, a place at Huancavelica so lethal it was known plainly as the Mine of Death. Mercury poisoning takes a body apart slowly. The tremors, the rotting gums, the mind going, and then the end. And this was not a handful of men with picks. Potosí was heavy industry, 3 centuries before the word existed. To crush the mountains of ore, the Spanish built a long chain of stone reservoirs high above the city and used the released water to drive rows of pounding mills, scores of them, hammering rock to powder around the clock. Whole neighborhoods of refining yards spread out below, thick with mercury smoke. What you have to picture is not a quiet mine. It is a roaring industrial city grinding a mountain into money, staffed by people who were sent there against their will. So how many died at Potosí and in the mills around it? Here this channel has to stop and be honest, because this is exactly the kind of number that gets thrown around with no source behind it. You will read that 8 million people died here. You will hear millions, stated flat, as settled fact. The truth is that nobody kept an honest ledger of the dead, and serious historians do not agree on the count. Careful modern estimates of deaths tied directly to the mine's land in the hundreds of thousands, and some scholars argue that disease, the same waves of epidemic wrecking native communities across the whole of the Americas, killed far more people than the shafts ever did. The round figure of 8 million is almost certainly folklore, repeated because it sounds like the size of the crime feels. What is not in dispute is that the suffering was enormous, that some 30,000 enslaved Africans were shipped in to labor and die alongside the conscripted miners, and that the people who lived under that mountain gave it a name that needs no footnote. They called it the mountain that eats men. Hold that in your mind, because every coin in that treasure chest started here, in that dark. Now follow the silver as it turns into the coin. Getting metal out of the ground is only half the engineering. The other half is turning a lump of raw silver into something a stranger a world away will take without weighing it, testing it, or biting it. That is the real trick, and it is a problem of trust as much as metalwork. In the 1570s, the crown built a royal mint at Potosí, a house of money called the Casa de Moneda, right at the source, so the silver could become coin in the shadow of the mountain that produced it. What came out of it was the real ocho, the 8 real coin. 8 reals made 1, which is why it earned the name peso de a ocho, a weight of 8, and in English, that came out as piece of 8. Every one of them was built to a standard fixed back in 1497, under Ferdinand and Isabella, decades before Potosí was even found. A full coin was meant to carry about 25 grams of fine silver, at a purity near 93%, in a disc roughly 1.5 inches across. That standard is the entire point of the thing. It meant a trader in Manila and a trader in Seville could hold the same coin and know, without any test, close to exactly how much silver sat in their palm. The value lived in the metal, pinned to a promise, and holding that promise across an ocean was the engineering feat. And think about what that promise actually required. The same coin, to the same weight and the same fineness, came out of mints thousands of miles apart, at Mexico City, at Lima, at Potosí, and later at Santiago, on 2 continents, run by different men in different decades. A silver dollar struck in the Andes and a silver dollar struck in Mexico were meant to be interchangeable down to the gram. Getting a standard to hold like that, across an empire, with no wires and no machines to check it, was not a small thing. It was one of the first times in history that money became genuinely uniform across the world, and that uniformity is exactly what let the coin travel as far as it did. The coins even carried their own paperwork, stamped into the metal. Each coin bore a cross quartered with the castles and lions of Castile and Leon on one face, and a crowned shield on the other, along with a mark for the mint, a P for Potosí, the initial of the assayer who vouched for its silver, and the numeral 8 for its value. A chain of accountability punched into a coin, so that if a bad batch turned up, you could read off the metal exactly where it came from and who signed for it. Remember that chain of accountability, because it comes back before we are done. Here is where the picture in your head is probably wrong, and it is worth slowing down on. When you imagine one of these coins, you likely see a neat round coin with a crisp patterned edge, the sort behind glass in a museum case. During the golden age of piracy, the coins that actually filled the chests looked almost nothing like that. They were crude, handmade slugs called cobs. A cob was made fast and made by hand. A worker cut a chunk off a bar of refined silver, weighed it, shaved it down or trimmed it up until it hit the legal weight, then laid it on a die and struck it with a single blow of a hammer. What you got was a lump, lopsided, cracked at the edges, half the design running off the metal. Right weight, wrong shape. A cob was ugly, and it did not matter at all, because nobody was judging it by its looks. They were judging it by what the scale said and what the stamp promised. The clean, round, machine-struck coin came later, and this is a genuine correction to the legend. That precise milled edge, the reeded rim you picture, was the work of machinery, screw presses turned by mills, which is where the word milled even comes from. It pressed out blanks of even thickness and stamped a pattern right onto the rim. Spain did not roll that technology out across its colonial mints until the 1730s, when the famous pillar dollar started coming out of Mexico. By then, the classic golden age of piracy was already ending, so the tidy silver dollar most people picture in Blackbeard's hands mostly comes after Blackbeard. The coin he really handled was a hand-struck cob, closer to a stamped nugget than to anything from a museum case. There was a hard reason to want that machined edge, and it is built into how these coins were used. Because the value sat in the raw metal, a patient crook could get rich by clipping. You shave a thin curl of silver off the rim of every coin that passes through your hands. Spend the coin on at full value, and quietly melt down your shavings. Do it to enough coins, and you have stolen a fortune without ever committing a theft anyone can see. Worse, the clipped and the honest coins looked the same at a glance, so people started hoarding the good full-weight coins and spending the shaved ones, and the bad money slowly drove the good money into hiding. The milled, patterned edge was the answer. Shave a coin with a machined rim, and the broken pattern shows the tampering instantly. In 1728, the Spanish crown finally ordered a corded edge onto the coinage to kill clipping for good. The edge was an anti-theft device, engineered into the money. Now, the wedges, because this is where the coin reaches straight into your own language, and most people who use the phrase have no idea. Picture a sailor holding one piece of 8 who wants to buy something worth a fraction of it. There is no pocketful of small change in this world. Official small coins were always scarce, especially out in the colonies. So he does something that sounds insane to us. He takes a blade or a chisel and cuts the coin apart. Because the coin is worth its weight in silver, a physical slice of it is worth a matching slice of the value. Cut the disc into 8 even wedges, like a silver pie, and each wedge is 1/8 of a piece of 8. Those wedges had a name. They were called bits. Follow that word forward. 1 bit is 1/8 of the coin. 2 bits is 1/4 of it. And when the young United States built its own dollar directly on the Spanish coin, that old scrap of speech rode along with it. To this day, an American who calls a 25-cent piece 2 bits is speaking the language of a chopped-up Spanish silver coin without knowing it. Every time somebody sings shave and a haircut, 2 bits, they are quoting a price in hacked pieces of Andean silver. The quarter in your pocket is the ghost of a wedge that somebody chiseled off one of those coins 300 years ago. That is not a figure of speech. That is literally where the words come from. So we have the object now. A slug of Andean silver, cut to an exact weight, struck by hand, valued by the scale, marked with the chain of hands that made it, and splittable with a knife down to 1/8 of itself. Now watch what that object does the moment it gets loose in the world, because this is where it stops being a coin and becomes a machine that moved wealth across whole oceans. Spanish treasure fleets carried the silver east across the Atlantic to Seville, where it flooded into Europe through the Crown's trade house and paid for Spain's wars and Spain's debts. So much silver hit the continent that it helped set off a long, slow rise in prices that historians still argue over. A wave of inflation rolling out from Spain across 100 years. Those fleets were their own marvel of organization. Twice a year, on a fixed schedule, convoys of galleons gathered the year's silver at fortified ports like Portobello, Cartagena, and Havana, then ran the Atlantic in a heavily guarded pack because a lone silver ship was the richest target on the ocean. Whole navies and whole generations of privateers and pirates organized their lives around the hope of catching one. Nations went to war over the timing of these fleets. Hold on to that, because we will come back to it. That part you might expect. Here is the part that stuns people. An even bigger share of the silver went the other way, west, across the Pacific, straight to China. Every year, Spanish galleons ran between Acapulco, on the coast of Mexico, and Manila in the Philippines, hauling chests of silver pesos out and bringing back silk and porcelain and spice. It ran like clockwork from 1,000, 565 all the way to 1,815, one of the longest-running trade routes in history. And the ships were so heavily armed that across 2.5 centuries, every pirate and privateer in the Pacific managed to capture just 4 of them at sea. A single galleon could carry 3 million silver pesos in its hold. China is what turned this coin into world money. The Ming Empire had shifted its taxes onto silver, and a country of that size, running on silver, was a thirst almost nothing on earth could fill. American silver poured in to meet it. By the reckoning of modern historians, somewhere between a third and a half of all the silver ever dug out of the New World ended up in China. Chinese merchants came to trust the Spanish coin so completely that they punched their own little symbols into it, called chop marks, each one a merchant personally vouching for the silver as the coin moved from hand to hand. A coin born in a Bolivian mine was changing hands in the markets of Beijing, stamped by men who had never once heard the name Potosí. That flow was wildly lopsided, and the imbalance had a long shadow. China wanted the silver and would trade its finest goods for it, but there was very little Europe made that China wanted in return. Silver went east and mostly stayed east. For centuries, European traders hunted for something, anything, they could sell into China to slow that drain of metal, and that hunt is a straight line to one of the ugliest chapters that followed, when the answer they landed on, generations later, was opium. But that is a story for another day. Line it all up, and the picture is staggering. The same coin, to the same standard, was legal money in the Spanish Empire, welcome across Europe, the backbone of trade in the American colonies, and treasured in the ports of Asia, all at once, all trusted the same way. Nothing had ever done that. It went by a dozen names in a dozen languages: peso, duro, piastra, Spanish dollar, piece of 8. But it was one coin doing one job on a scale no money had reached before. This was the first truly global currency. Centuries before the dollar you carry now took the crown. And when the founders of the United States went looking for something solid to anchor their own new money to, they did not invent it out of thin air. They pinned the American dollar to the Spanish coin, already sitting in everyone's pockets. The very word dollar comes down from an old European coin the Spanish piece resembled, and Spanish silver stayed legal tender inside the United States until 1857. The dollar sign in front of every price you see, the 2 bits, the whole shape of the money in your hand, traces back through that coin to a mountain that eats men. A machine that big has one weak point, and it is the same thread holding this entire story together: trust. The coin only worked because everyone, everywhere, believed the silver was really inside it. Break that belief, and the whole machine seizes. In the 1640s, that is precisely what happened. In a scandal most people have never heard of that rattled markets from Peru to China. Inside the mint at Potosí, officials had been quietly cheating the coins for years. They were cutting the silver with cheaper metal, striking coins that carried far less silver than the standard promised, stamping them at full value, and pocketing the difference. Traders had been noticing suspiciously light and low-grade coins as far back as the 1620s. By the late 1630s, the bad coins were bleeding out into world markets. When investigators finally ran the assays, some of the debased pieces held only around 3/4 of the silver they were supposed to. A coin whose entire reason to exist was a guaranteed weight of metal had been hollowed out from the inside. The trick itself was simple and quiet. At the melt, where silver got mixed with a little copper to harden it, the mint men just tipped the balance, slipping in more base metal and less silver than the law allowed, then stamping the light coins at full value. Records from the investigation suggest they were even running extra debased coins off the books, at night, away from the official count. And cleaning it up was slow and painful. Sorting the good coins from the bad meant recalling and rechecking huge quantities of money, already scattered across the world, marking the ones that passed, melting the ones that failed. You cannot unring that bell quickly. For years, nobody handling Spanish silver could be quite sure what was in their hand. Word got out, and it got out everywhere, because the coin was everywhere. Merchants from Boston to Beijing started refusing Potosí silver, unable to tell which coins were honest and which were watered down. The most trusted money on the planet suddenly could not be trusted at all, and the panic ran along every trade route the coin had ever traveled. The Spanish crown came down hard. King Philip IV sent a former inquisitor, Francisco Nestares Marin, to Potosí to rip the fraud open. Nestares Marin arrived in 1648 and spent the better part of a decade on it. Heads rolled, and that is nearly literal. The mint's assayer, Felipe Ramirez de Arellano, and a rich and well-connected local official named Francisco Gomez de la Rocha were both executed for their part in the scheme. The bad coins were dragged back down in value, recalled, melted, and finally banned outright. People took to calling the debased pieces after Rocha himself, a fraudster's name stamped by rumor onto the coins he had ruined. There is a grim footnote the record insists on, and this channel will not skip it. When the crown needed people to blame, the enslaved African workers inside the mint were among the first arrested and punished, while several of the powerful men who actually ran the scheme maneuvered for years to protect themselves. The people with the least power took the hardest fall for a fraud that was run from the top. The historian Chris Lane, who has done more than anyone to reconstruct what really happened, has laid all of this out, and it is worth sitting with rather than skating past. And the damage did not heal fast. The reputation of Potosí silver, and with it the reputation of the whole Spanish Empire, took a wound that lingered for decades, a long financial hangover on top of a mine whose richest ore was already running thin. To rebuild the world's trust, the Spanish even changed the coin's face. They redesigned the coin around the Pillars of Hercules and the motto Plus Ultra, More Beyond, a new look meant to announce a new, honest coin. That is how deep the wound went. They had to restyle the money to convince the planet it was money again. Which brings us all the way back to the deck and the open chest and the myth we started with. Picture it one last time. A pirate's fortune, a locked box brimming with gold doubloons, blazing in the sun. Almost every piece of that image is wrong, and now you have the tools to see exactly why. Start with the doubloon itself. A doubloon was a gold coin, a Spanish escudo, and here even the experts have to hedge, because doubloon was loose sailors' slang and not a precise denomination, and different sources hang the name on different escudo coins. The one most often called a doubloon was a small piece of gold, under 7 grams of it, at 22 carat, worth about 4 of the silver dollars. Gold coins were real, and pirates were thrilled to lay hands on them. But gold was the rare prize, not the daily haul. The overwhelming bulk of hard money moving through the Caribbean was silver, and the silver workhorse was the piece of 8. A chest genuinely overflowing with gold was a jackpot a pirate might dream about his whole life and never once open. And in truth, most plunder was not even coin. A captured ship's real cargo was ordinary and useful and grim. Cloth, tools, medicine, food, rigging, navigational gear, and horrifyingly often, enslaved people held as cargo. Money, when they got it, came in a jumble of coins from a dozen nations, all sorted the same way it always was, by weight, on a scale, with a piece of 8 as the yardstick everyone agreed on. That is the detail the movies never show, and it changes the whole picture. A merchant of that age did not count coins so much as weigh them. He kept a small balance scale on the counter, and often a pair of shears beside it. You handed over your silver, he weighed it against a standard, and if he needed to make change, he might simply cut a coin down to the right mass on the spot. That is why chopping a coin into bits was normal, and legal, and expected. The coin was not a token with a number on it, the way the bill in your wallet is. It was a lump of precious metal, and its value was however much it weighed. And the buried treasure map, the X marking a hole on a lonely island, that is almost pure fiction, and we can very nearly name the author. The whole image of pirates burying chests of gold and drawing maps back to them was popularized by one book, Robert Louis Stevenson's Treasure Island, published in 1883, more than a century after the Golden Age was finished. Stevenson is also the man who first put pieces of 8 into the mouth of a parrot. Real pirate wealth mostly did not get buried at all. It got spent, fast and hard, in port, or fenced through crooked merchants, or melted down and restruck so it could never be traced. The whole romance of the buried chest is a Victorian novelist's invention, painted over a far grubbier truth, and we are not guessing about that truth. This is the part that matters most for a channel that cares about evidence. There is exactly one Golden Age pirate shipwreck that has ever been found and firmly identified, the Whydah, the ship of the pirate Sam Bellamy, which went down in a storm off Cape Cod in 1717. Bellamy had captured her as a slave ship before he made her his own, which tells you plenty on its own. Divers have pulled thousands of coins up out of that wreck, and they are not chests of gleaming doubloons. They are silver, pieces of 8 by the fistful, the same hand-struck Potosí cobs we have been tracking this whole time. The one pirate hoard the ocean ever handed back is hard proof that the treasure was real. It just wasn't gold. So here is the coin, finally seen whole. Not the shiny prop from the movies, but a slug of silver clawed out of a mountain by people who died doing it, cut to a standard set by a queen 50 years before that mountain was found, struck by hand into an ugly little lump, marked with the men who made it, chopped into wedges to make change, trusted from Boston to Beijing, and wired so deep into money itself that a fragment of it still rattles in your pocket every time you say 2 bits. The most recognizable object in all of piracy was never really about pirates at all. It was the machine that ran the world, and the pirates were only ever standing close enough to catch a few coins as it went past. If you made it this far, subscribe. We put the pirate myths on trial against the record here, and we don't flinch from the parts that aren't fun. Then settle one thing for me in the comments. Knowing what you know now, that the death toll is genuinely disputed and the sources fight over it, do you think we should still call Potosí the deadliest mine in human history? Or is that number folklore too? Make your case below. I read them. Next time, we are staying with the money and going after the treasure fleets themselves, the Spanish galleons packed with this silver, and the one man who spent his entire life trying to steal a whole fleet of it out from under an empire.